The autumn sun dipped low over the quiet suburb of West Maple, casting long shadows across the soccer field where 12-year-old Lucas Baird had just finished practice. The smell of cut grass lingered in the cooling air, and the metal bleachers radiated the last warmth of the day. The field stood behind Lincoln Middle School, framed by chain-link fences and flanked on one side by a row of neglected storage sheds. Most kids had already left their parents waiting in running cars along the lot. Lucas, though, stayed behind, always the last to leave. He liked the silence. It gave him room to think, to pretend he was someone else for a little while. That evening, he paced slowly toward the edge of the field, cleats in hand, eyes on something no one else saw. That was the last time anyone remembered seeing him. Lucas was the kind of boy who slipped under the radar. Too polite to cause trouble, too quiet to draw attention. He wasn't particularly athletic, but he loved soccer anyway. His teammates liked him well enough, though no one called him a best friend. His parents, both busy professionals, trusted him to get home on his own. He lived 4 blocks from school and usually walked even in the cold. That day, in October 2000, he never made it home. When his mother called the school after 6, there was confusion. The coach had seen him leave, but no one could say when or with whom. The police were notified, but it started like every other small-town missing child case, with questions and few answers. At first, the community rallied. Flyers went up on every telephone pole, local news covered the story nightly, and volunteers combed the neighborhood. The soccer field became a hub of speculation and grief. Parents grew anxious, hovering over their children like storm clouds. Lincoln Middle tightened security. The sheds behind the field were searched and researched, nothing more than dusty equipment and broken tools. Every locker in the school was opened. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters flew overhead. But Lucas was gone. No note, no belongings. His soccer cleats, oddly, had vanished too. That detail stuck with his mother more than anything. He always left them in his bag. They were neon green, loud and ugly, a birthday gift he hated but wore out of guilt. Yet they were missing too. It didn't make sense. As weeks passed, hope decayed into something sour. The town quietly accepted the mystery, as towns often do. Without leads, the investigation stalled. Some whispered that Lucas had run away. Others blamed a stranger, though West Maple had never seen a child abduction before. A few turned suspicion inward, asking about his home life, his teachers, even the school janitor. Nothing held. The police offered no statements beyond standard lines of investigation. Lucas's parents withdrew, unable to face the sea of maybes. Halloween came and went with a hush. The soccer season ended without ceremony, and slowly people stopped asking. But the soccer field remained. Empty most afternoons. Grass growing longer, wild, as if it too had been stunned into silence. 21 years later, almost to the day, the locker room in Lincoln Middle's West Wing was scheduled for demolition. The school had expanded since the incident, and the older buildings were being cleared. One of the last remaining metal lockers, welded shut due to a faulty latch, was finally forced open. Inside, sealed and untouched, sat a dusty gym bag. The custodian, puzzled, turned it over with his gloved hands. A name tag stitched inside read Lucas Baird. Beneath the bag were a pair of neon green cleats, immaculate despite the years. The air inside the locker was dry, preserved somehow from the elements. The scene was unsettling, quiet, almost reverent, like a shrine never meant to be disturbed. News of the discovery spread quickly. Former students, now adults, returned to the field where they once played. The town's collective memory stirred uneasy. What had been buried was now unearthed. The locker was in an area previously believed to have been checked. Its door rusted shut since the early 2000s. Police reopened the case, this time with forensic tools unheard of in the original investigation. The cleats were sent for analysis. The gym bag's contents cataloged. The dust that clung to the soles was not from the field, but from inside the school. How did it get there? And why now? As Lucas's brother Alex Baird stepped back into town for the first time in over a decade, a familiar unease returned. He had been 17 when Lucas disappeared, a senior with dreams of leaving West Maple behind. He had. But now, standing by the rusted chain-link fence watching the field from which his brother had vanished, he felt a chill not from the wind but from memory. The past had clawed its way forward, demanding to be seen. He could feel it in the air. Something about this wasn't right. Someone had placed those cleats in that locker, and someone had sealed them there not in 2000 but much later. It had taken 2 decades, but the story was no longer cold. It was waiting, dormant, hidden behind rust and metal and silence. Lucas hadn't run away. That much was clear now. His cleats had been kept preserved. But by who? And why? These were questions Alex intended to answer. He hadn't come back just to grieve. He came back because something inside him whispered the truth had never been buried deep. It had been hiding in plain sight, just like those cleats. And now someone would have to pay for that silence. Alex stood in the storage room of the old West Wing watching the forensic technician photograph the contents of the gym bag. The room smelled of rust and mildew, a dampness clinging to the concrete like regret. There were no windows here, just flickering fluorescent lights and the soft scratch of gloved fingers on aged canvas. The cleats sat neatly side by side, their neon green color still vibrant. The shoelaces were tucked in as if placed with care. Next to them inside the bag was a folded piece of notebook paper, brittle at the edges but otherwise intact. It had no words, just a childish drawing of a boy standing under a goalpost, a smile drawn with thick lines. Alex felt his throat tighten. He remembered Lucas drawing like that. His pencil always pressed 2 hard lines, always too bold. The detective assigned to the reopened case was younger than Alex expected, maybe early 30s, with a clipboard that seemed to anchor her in the room. She explained in a measured tone that the locker was sealed so thoroughly that no one had been able to pry it open until now. The hinges had fused, and the rust had locked them shut from years of condensation and neglect. Her words were factual, but something in her eyes betrayed discomfort. She handed Alex a report listing the items found. There was one item not mentioned publicly yet. A photo tucked behind the cleats, face down as if deliberately hidden. It showed a group of boys at soccer practice dated October 2000, the day Lucas vanished. Every boy had been identified except one. A tall figure in the background, half cropped by the frame, looking directly at the camera. No one could remember who he was. That photograph lingered in Alex's mind as he walked through the halls of Lincoln Middle School. The scent of polished linoleum and industrial cleaner had not changed. Rows of lockers lined the corridors, most of them newer now, but the air still felt the same. He passed the trophy case where Lucas's photo had once hung before being quietly removed years ago. Too painful for the school, they had said. Too distracting. Alex paused at the entrance to the soccer field, now renovated with new bleachers and artificial turf. The field was alive with activity, younger kids shouting and running, unaware of the field's history. A part of him resented the brightness. The past had no place here anymore. Still, he stepped closer as if the ground might remember his brother better than people did. That night, Alex returned to his childhood home. His parents had sold it years ago, but he parked outside anyway, staring at the porch steps where he and Lucas once sat after dinner, tossing pebbles into the garden. The lights were on, unfamiliar now, with different curtains and a new mailbox. He did not go inside. Instead, he drove to the motel where he was staying and spread the photocopies of the evidence across the bed. The drawing, the photo, the bag's inventory. He stared at the cleats the longest. The soles had faint scuff marks, not from concrete or gravel, but from a polished surface. The lab report confirmed it. The dust embedded in the grooves matched the janitorial closet's floor material. That closet had not existed in 2000. It was built in 2005 during renovations. That meant one thing. Someone had hidden Lucas's things years after he vanished. The realization sat heavy on Alex's chest. Someone had not only kept his brother's belongings, but had staged their discovery. Why now? What did they hope to achieve? He called the detective, asked if the photo had been cross-referenced with faculty records. She said they were working on it. But Alex could not wait. He posted a scan of the photo online, reaching out to old classmates, tagging names, asking questions. Within an hour, someone messaged back. A girl named Jessica Hughes. She remembered that day. She said the man in the background was not a student. He had been a volunteer assistant, someone who helped the coach occasionally. No one ever knew his full name, just that he wore a whistle and carried a clipboard. Jessica remembered his shoes. They were white with red laces. She said she only remembered because he had scolded her once for kicking a ball too close to his feet. Alex leaned back against the headboard, the motel light buzzing faintly above him. An unnamed volunteer, no official record, no background check. In 2000, that would not have seemed unusual. The school barely had a protocol for visitor logs. But why would this man be on the field the day Lucas vanished, and why was he staring directly at the camera? Alex pulled out an old photo album from his duffel bag, one he had brought with him. He flipped through page after page until he found one from a community picnic 2 weeks before Lucas disappeared. He stared at the background, at the blurred figures behind the main subjects. There, standing near the refreshment tent. Same man, same posture, same blank expression. He needed to be identified. Alex scanned the photo again, uploading it to a missing persons database, hoping someone might recognize the face. Hours passed with no response. But before he drifted into a restless sleep, he thought he heard something outside the motel window. A shuffle, a soft thud. When he looked, the parking lot was empty. Just a breeze carrying dead leaves across the pavement. Still, he locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and placed the photo face down on the nightstand. For the first time in years, Lucas felt close, but not in a comforting way, more like a whisper just behind his ear. Something was unraveling, and Alex knew he was not imagining it. The following morning, Alex awoke before sunrise, the motel room still cloaked in shadow. He had not slept much. The image of the man with red-laced shoes lingered in his thoughts, replaying like a scene stuck on loop. He sat at the edge of the bed, scrolling through digital archives of Lincoln Middle School newsletters and yearbooks. The assistant coaches were rarely mentioned by name. In the fall issue of 2000, there was a group photo of the soccer team. Again, the man appeared in the background, partially obscured by a student. His face turned slightly toward the camera, always watching. Alex zoomed in. The face was familiar but elusive, like a word on the tip of the tongue. He cross-referenced staff records but found no match. The man had slipped through without a trace. He wondered if anyone else remembered him, anyone beyond Jessica Hughes. After breakfast, Alex met the detective at the police station. She reviewed his findings with interest but maintained the need for official procedure. The photo would be submitted to facial recognition software, though the results might take time. Meanwhile, she suggested visiting the school again, this time with access to the old storage records. There might be something, she said, that had not yet been cataloged. Together, they returned to Lincoln Middle. The building had changed, but the West Wing remained intact, untouched by renovation crews due to budget delays. The storage room still held old documents stacked in dusty banker boxes labeled by year. Alex and the detective worked through 1999 to 2001, scanning sign-in sheets, volunteer rosters, and equipment logs. In one folder, nearly missed due to faded ink, they found a name scribbled in uneven handwriting. J. Wexley. No title, no position. But the page listed a donation of soccer cones and equipment under his name. Alex felt a jolt of recognition. Wexley. It stirred something. He had heard that name before, long ago. The detective noted it and promised to search DMV and public record databases. That afternoon, Alex visited the local library, where a back room held archives of the town's newspaper. On microfilm reels, he scrolled through editions from early 2000. A name jumped out from the obituaries section. Jonathan Wexley. Died March 3, 2000. He had been 32. The cause of death was listed as suicide. A quiet funeral had been held, attended only by distant relatives, but the date chilled Alex. Lucas disappeared in October. Wexley had died months before that. The timeline did not add up, unless it was not the same person, or unless someone had used the name after his death. Either way, the connection felt too close to ignore. That evening, Alex drove to the town cemetery guided by the location mentioned in the obituary. He found the gravestone in the back row partly hidden by overgrown grass and ivy. It was a simple marker, weathered by time. No flowers, no trinkets, just the name and 2 dates. He stood there for a while, unsure what he hoped to feel. Then he noticed something peculiar. Fresh soil. Not a full disturbance, but enough to suggest someone had been there recently. The weeds had been pulled back in one section. A small indentation in the dirt hinted at something placed and then removed. Perhaps a candle, or a photo. Someone had visited. And that meant someone remembered Wexley, or used his grave as a cover for something else. Back at the motel, Alex called Jessica again. He asked if she had ever seen the man with the red laces anywhere outside school. She hesitated, then said yes. One time. He had been outside a convenience store near her old neighborhood standing by a payphone. She remembered because he had stared at her as she walked past a look she had never forgotten. Alex asked for the location and drove there the next day. The store was gone, replaced by a car wash, but a few of the older buildings remained. He knocked on doors, asking longtime residents if they remembered the man from the photo. Most shook their heads. One elderly woman paused, then said she might have seen someone like that. She said he used to walk along the creek trail behind the old textile mill. That trail had since been overgrown, abandoned after a flood damaged the bridge. Alex followed the creek path the next morning. The air was thick with mist and the scent of wet leaves. The trail wound between trees, their branches heavy with the weight of years. About a mile in, he found the remnants of the collapsed bridge it supports jutting from the stream like broken ribs. Nearby, half hidden in the underbrush, was a rusted bike frame tangled in vines. Beyond it, a clearing opened up, and in its center stood an old storage container, graffiti-covered and forgotten. The door hung slightly ajar. Inside it was empty, except for a clipboard on the floor and a cracked whistle. Alex stepped inside, heart-pounding. The clipboard bore no name, but a crumpled paper was wedged in the corner. It was a roster. Lucas's name was circled in red. The other names were faded. The paper was dated 2 weeks before the disappearance. He looked around the container again. On the back wall, barely visible, someone had etched initials into the metal. A B for Alex, LB for Lucas, and below it, in shaky letters, WEX. The name returned again and again, as if it refused to let go. The sky darkened as Alex left the clearing, the sun dipping beneath the trees and taking warmth with it. The storage container and its contents weighed heavily on his mind. Someone had used that space not just for storage but for planning. The clipboard, the whistle, and most importantly, the soccer roster dated just before Lucas disappeared were deliberate choices. He walked the trail back toward the town, his boots crunching through fallen leaves and damp earth. At the trail's entrance, he paused beside an old signpost tagged with faded paint. Across the road sat a single-story house with flaking white paint and a sagging porch. A soft yellow light glowed behind one of the curtains, flickering slightly like a candle or a faulty bulb. Something about it felt familiar. He realized it sat on the route Lucas would have walked home that day. This house had always been there, always quiet, always anonymous. Alex made his way to the porch, hesitating only a moment before knocking. The door remained closed, but after a few seconds, a small movement in the curtain confirmed someone was watching. He waited, not moving, not speaking. Eventually, the door creaked open, just enough for a voice to emerge. The voice belonged to an older woman. She asked if he was from the utility company. He said no, that he was looking into an old disappearance. When he mentioned Lucas's name, the woman fell silent. Then she opened the door a little wider enough for him to see her pale face framed with gray hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her eyes narrowed. She said she remembered the boy. She said she remembered a whistle. She told him that on the day Lucas vanished, she had seen someone near the tree line by the trail. He was wearing a white jacket and pacing like he was waiting for someone. She never reported it because she thought it was just another parent or maybe a coach. The man never came to the door, but he lingered for almost an hour, then disappeared into the woods when a car passed by. Alex thanked her and asked if she could describe the man. She said he was tall, his hair dark but messy, and he wore strange red-laced shoes that caught her attention. She had never seen him again. She closed the door slowly after that, as if exhausted by the memory. Alex stood on the porch for a while longer, staring across the empty lot between the house and the edge of the woods. Whoever that man had been, he had waited there with purpose. The yellow light flickered again from the window. It cast a shadow along the porch wall, a tall shadow that seemed to lean toward the door just as Alex turned to leave. That night, Alex returned to the motel and began researching the name Wexley again, trying different spellings and combinations. He discovered that Jonathan Wexley had a brother named Carl, who had briefly lived in West Maple during the late 1990s. Carl Wexley had a history of mental health issues and a misdemeanor arrest for trespassing near a youth camp 2 towns over. The record was thin, but the photo attached to the case file gave Alex a jolt. The man in the picture looked eerily similar to the figure in the soccer team photo. It was not a perfect match, but the jawline, the hair, and the eyes bore enough resemblance to unsettle him. Carl Wexley had disappeared from public record shortly after 2001. No forwarding address, no death certificate. Alex forwarded the information to the detective, who promised to track the name through old social services and medical databases. While waiting for her response, Alex drove to the police archive building the next morning and requested access to the 2000 missing persons reports. Most of the documents were digital now, but a few original case folders had been preserved. He flipped through pages detailing the initial search efforts maps of the field timelines of volunteer movements and witness statements. One stood out. It was from a substitute janitor who had worked 1 week in October covering for a man on medical leave. His name was David R., and his statement mentioned that he saw someone entering the West Wing after hours carrying a duffel bag and what looked like soccer equipment. The janitor had reported it to a supervisor, but no one followed up because nothing appeared to be missing. Alex flagged the report and asked for any contact information. The address on file was outdated, but the clerk helped him locate a newer address through tax records. It was just 10 miles outside of West Maple, a rural home tucked into the woods near a county line where law enforcement often failed to communicate. Alex decided to go there himself. He arrived that afternoon. The road was narrow, flanked by thick trees that reached toward the sky like gnarled arms. The house was small and weather-beaten, its roof sagging in the middle and a swing set rusting in the backyard. He knocked twice. No one answered. He tried again, waited, then circled to the back. A broken window was taped shut, and inside he saw stacks of boxes, an old sofa, and piles of newspapers. He was about to leave when he noticed a path leading from the back porch into the woods. The dirt was packed from use. Alex followed it. The path led to a clearing with a shed at its center. It was padlocked, but a side window had been broken. He peered inside. The interior was dark but cluttered. On the far wall, a corkboard held pinned photographs. He could not see the details, but one photo had a flash of neon green. His pulse quickened. He tried the shed door again, but the lock held. He took a few photos through the window, hoping to enhance them later. As he turned to leave, he heard rustling in the woods behind him. It was quick, then gone. A twig snapped, then silence. He did not wait. Alex did not speak of the shed to anyone for 2 days. He kept the images he had taken through the broken window saved on a flash drive and studied them late at night under the dim motel light. Using editing software, he adjusted the contrast, enhanced the shadows, and sharpened the blur. Slowly, the photographs on the wall inside the shed became clearer. There were at least 6 pinned images, all candid, all seemingly taken from a distance. 3 were of the soccer field. One was of a boy walking alone down a wooded path. Another showed a classroom with a red backpack on a desk. The last photo made Alex stop breathing. It showed Lucas. It was unmistakably him. He stood outside Lincoln Middle School, leaning on the railing with a soda in hand, smiling slightly. It was not a school photo. It was not from the yearbook. It was a private moment captured without his knowledge. Someone had been watching him before he disappeared. The discovery unsettled Alex deeply. It confirmed what he had only suspected before. Lucas had been targeted. This was not a random disappearance or a child who wandered off. This was methodical. Whoever had taken those photos had planned it and stalked him. He knew the shed might hold more clues, possibly even proof of what happened to his brother. But he also knew breaking into the shed illegally could compromise the investigation. He contacted the detective, told her everything, and asked her to meet him at the property. She agreed, but said she needed a warrant to access the shed officially. Alex spent the rest of the day walking the perimeter of the woods behind the house, trying to understand the layout. The shed was old, but built solid with a concrete base and metal sides. Someone had taken care to protect whatever was inside. When the detective arrived the following morning with 2 officers and a locksmith, the shed was unlocked with cautious anticipation. The door groaned open. Inside, the air was stale and dry, the smell of dust and rust lingering like an old secret. The corkboard with the photographs was still intact. Below it sat a wooden crate nailed shut. Along the walls were stacked milk crates filled with notebooks labeled with years dating back to 1996. One officer lifted the top book and opened it. Inside were page after page of names, dates, and observations. It read like surveillance logs. Lucas's name appeared repeatedly. There were notes about his schedule, his walking route, his favorite snack, and even when his parents typically returned home from work. The pages were written in shaky block letters, obsessive and detailed. It was a stalker's journal. The detective ordered the contents to be boxed and taken in for evidence processing. Alex stood to the side silent as officers moved through the shed. One of them pried open the crate. Inside were closed small items and several pairs of children's shoes, all tagged with dates. Some were dirty, others preserved in plastic. Alex turned away. His stomach twisted. He did not want to ask which pair belonged to Lucas. He already knew. The detective placed a hand on his shoulder and told him he had done the right thing by coming forward. The name Carl Wexley was brought up again, and the shed's location was linked to an old mail forwarding address in his name. For the first time, the case had weight behind it. Real evidence. Real names. Back at the station, the detective pulled Alex into her office and closed the door. She told him they had found fingerprints in the shed matching Carl Wexley's old arrest record. They now believed he had been living off the grid for years, changing names, moving through temporary housing, and using old buildings like the shed as safe zones. His last known location had been a facility in southern Illinois that discharged him without follow-up. That was in 2002. Since then, he had disappeared again. She said it was possible he was still in the area, possibly watching, possibly trying to finish what he started. They had issued a statewide bulletin and were actively searching known associates. That night, Alex sat in his car outside the motel, unable to go inside. The image of the shoes in the crate haunted him. He thought about all the names in the journals. How many of them were alive? How many had vanished? He wondered if Lucas had been the only one. He doubted it now. This man, whoever he truly was, had been building this obsession for years, and no one had seen it. No one had stopped it. He leaned back against the headrest and stared at the ceiling of the car. He felt numb, but he also felt resolve. The man who had taken his brother had made a mistake. He had kept trophies. He had left a trail. The next morning, Alex received a message from the detective. One of the notebooks had included a rough hand-drawn map folded and tucked inside the back cover. It showed a different wooded area, farther west of the town marked with a red X. She said they would need to check it out. Alex agreed to meet her there. He arrived first and waited in his car, parked on the shoulder of a narrow gravel road. The woods here were thicker, darker, the trees older and closer together. No trails, no homes. Just wild land. He studied the trees, their twisted shapes, the way the light barely pierced the canopy. He stepped out, and for a moment he felt watched, not imagined, real, a pressure on the back of his neck, a sound just behind the branches. But when he turned, there was nothing. Alex stayed still by the gravel road, scanning the woods beyond the ditch. The wind whispered through the trees, brushing the tall grass with gentle waves. His heart beat steady but sharp. The sense of being observed had passed, but the silence remained thick. Moments later, the detective's car pulled up behind him, and 2 uniformed officers stepped out as well. They brought shovels, flashlights, and evidence kits. The map they found in the journal was crude, but directional enough to guide them. A narrow game trail cut through the brush about 30 feet from the road. They followed it in single file, ducking under branches, their boots crunching on old leaves. After 10 minutes, the trail opened into a clearing marked by a cluster of gnarled tree roots. The red X from the map appeared carved faintly into the bark of the largest tree. They fanned out and began to search. One officer tapped his boot on a patch of earth that gave a hollow sound. The ground was soft, the dirt looser than its surroundings. The officers exchanged glances and began to dig. Within minutes, they uncovered a sheet of plywood buried just beneath the soil. Lifting it revealed a wooden hatch, old and splintered, secured with rusted nails. The detective nodded. Carefully, the officers pried it open. A dark opening yawned beneath them, revealing a descending shaft no wider than a crawl space. The air that escaped was stale thick with mildew and something older. One officer lowered a camera attached to a cable. The live feed showed a cramped chamber below 8 feet down with walls lined in rotted boards. In one corner sat a broken chair, in the other a small mattress stained and sunken. The room was no wider than a storage closet. Alex watched the screen in silence. One of the officers volunteered to descend first. He clipped a harness to the rope and dropped into the hole. The camera followed him as he swept his flashlight along the cramped space. He called out that the floor was solid and the room dry. Then he stopped moving. He whispered something. The audio crackled. The detective leaned closer. The officer said he had found something. A rusted lunchbox. Inside were several photos, a small flashlight, and a stack of handwritten notes bound together with string. The notes appeared to be written by a child. The handwriting was shaky, clumsy, as if written in fear or poor light. He read aloud the first line. It said, "My name is Lucas." Alex felt his knees give slightly. He placed a hand on the nearest tree to steady himself. The officer passed the notebook up to the surface. Alex reached for it instinctively, but the detective stopped him. She took the bundle carefully and began flipping through the pages with gloved hands. The entries were sporadic. Some were only a few lines. Others filled entire pages. The dates were inconsistent, marked in strange sequences. But the voice behind them was unmistakably young. One entry described hearing footsteps above. Another detailed hunger cold and dreams about home. The boy had not been taken far. He had been buried in the woods. The journal ended abruptly with a final entry that read, "I think he is coming back today." The discovery confirmed what Alex had feared. His brother had been kept alive for some time after the disappearance, hidden just beyond reach. The timeline became clearer. Lucas had likely been lured into the woods, trapped beneath the earth, and then left behind. Whether he had died from neglect or something worse remained unclear. The officers continued to search the chamber, lifting debris, checking corners. They found a small tin cup, a worn sock, and a tiny plastic figurine missing an arm. Alex recognized it. It had once belonged to Lucas's pencil case, a toy he always carried for good luck during tests. He had not seen it in over 20 years. The forensic team documented everything. They sealed the notebook, and the photos marked the chamber for a full excavation and placed temporary fencing around the site. The detective told Alex that what they had found was now considered a secondary crime scene. She promised to keep him informed of every step, but her voice wavered when she spoke. Her hands trembled slightly as she packed the evidence. Even she could not hide what this meant. Someone had built a prison for a child and walked away from it like it meant nothing. Someone had thought no one would ever find it. Alex returned to the motel that night unable to rest. He sat in the parking lot engine off staring at the sky. The stars flickered through a haze of clouds. He thought of Lucas alone in that hole, of the drawings, the cleats, the rusted lunchbox. He imagined him waiting, listening, believing someone might come. He had been so close to home, only a few miles from the soccer field, only a few miles from Alex. The guilt burned through him like acid. He closed his eyes and whispered an apology to the darkness. It did not feel like enough. Later that night, a call came from the detective. They had traced a storage unit in the name of Carl Wexley, rented 6 months after Lucas vanished. It was located in the industrial outskirts of a nearby city. They planned to open it first thing in the morning. She asked if Alex wanted to be there. He said yes. The pieces were coming together now, slowly but undeniably. Someone had built a cage. Someone had kept watch. Someone still needed to answer for all of it. The following morning brought heavy rain. Thick clouds sagged low over the city skyline as Alex followed the detective's unmarked vehicle toward the industrial park where the storage unit was located. The buildings around them were mostly warehouses, rusted shipping containers, and windowless facilities with peeling paint. The storage facility stood at the edge of the lot, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The attendant at the front office barely looked up from his screen when the detective flashed her badge. He handed over the unit key and pointed them down the row. Unit B-17 sat at the far end, its metal door streaked with rust and rainwater. The lock was intact, no signs of tampering. The name on the rental agreement was C. Wexley. No photo ID had been required at the time of signing, and payments had been made in cash. The last payment had been 6 months ago. Since then, the unit had sat untouched. They approached slowly. Alex felt a weight in his chest, an unspoken pressure building with each step. The detective inserted the key, paused, then turned it. The lock clicked. The door rolled up with a metallic groan. Inside, darkness pooled like oil. A musty odor rushed out, stale and heavy. The flashlight beams revealed shelves stacked with cardboard boxes, some labeled, others blank. A folded cot rested against one wall. A plastic chair with a cushion sat near the back, facing a wooden desk. The desk was cluttered with yellowing papers, old envelopes, and a pair of broken eyeglasses. A small TV sat on the floor beside it, attached to a VCR. Stacks of tapes filled a milk crate nearby. Each tape was numbered and dated. The detective exhaled slowly and called for evidence techs. Alex stepped back, afraid to touch anything. The detective reached for a box labeled 2000 and opened the flaps with gloved hands. Inside were notebooks and photographs. More photos of Lucas, photos taken from behind trees across streets through windows. One showed him sleeping at his desk during the study hall. Another captured him sitting on a curb eating a sandwich alone. Alex turned away, unable to look further. The reality became sharper with each image. Lucas had not been a victim of opportunity. He had been studied, tracked, and chosen. The mind behind the storage unit had documented everything. They had built a timeline, cataloged behaviors, and recorded patterns. A man had constructed an entire archive around a 12-year-old boy's life. The detective called for backup and instructed one officer to begin cataloging the contents of the desk. Inside one drawer, they found maps of the town with hand-drawn circles marking key locations, the soccer field, the school, the family's old home, and several wooded areas. On another map, lines connected each point with the dates written beside them. The movement patterns were precise, like a predator tracking its prey. In another drawer was a folder labeled Failsafe. It contained a single sheet of paper with instructions. The language was fragmented but clear. Destroy contents, relocate, use back road, remove shoes. The paper was signed with the initials CW. As the team processed the evidence, the detective turned her attention to the VCR. She connected it to the small TV and inserted the first tape. The screen flickered, then showed a grainy image of a room. The camera faced a door. After a few seconds, a figure entered the frame. It was Lucas. He stood in the doorway, looking confused, wearing his soccer uniform. He stepped forward, looking around. He called out, but there was no sound on the tape. He sat on the bed, clutching his gym bag. The screen went black. The detective removed the tape and stopped the feed. She would review the rest later, under controlled conditions. Alex stood frozen. That was the last known image of his brother alive. No longer a missing boy. Now a prisoner documented like a lab rat. Another box held ID cards, utility bills, and fake credentials under different names. Carl Wexley had used several aliases over the years. He had traveled between states' rented rooms and worked odd jobs under false identities. Most of the documents had been neatly filed as if prepared for use. One license had a photo of him with dyed hair and glasses. Another showed him older with a beard. His handwriting remained the same across all signatures. In one envelope was a receipt for a storage unit rented in another state dated 3 months ago. The trail had not ended. It had moved. The detective immediately called to alert authorities in that jurisdiction. If Wexley had relocated, there might still be time to find him. As the rain continued to fall, the evidence team packed boxes labeled evidence bags and sealed them for transport. Alex sat in the passenger seat of the detective's car, watching the windshield wipers slice across the glass. His mind replayed the tape. The image of Lucas stepping into that room unaware of what awaited him. He thought of the drawing found in the gym bag, the crooked smile, the goalpost in the background. Lucas had been full of hope even in those final moments. He did not know fear at first. That came later. That came when no one found him. By dusk, the unit was sealed again under police order. They would need more time to process the tapes, the journals, and the forged identities. But the picture was clear now. Carl Wexley had operated for years under different names, hiding in plain sight, always one step ahead. He had built a system. He had left breadcrumbs both intentional and careless, and for the first time, someone had followed them to the end. But the man himself remained missing. The final page was still unwritten. Alex knew this was not over. Somewhere, the man who did this was watching. He was waiting for the moment to vanish again. But this time, Alex would not stop until he was found. 3 days after the discovery at the storage unit, Alex received a call just past midnight. The detective's voice was calm but firm. Authorities in Indiana had located the second storage unit registered under one of Carl Wexley's aliases. Inside, they had found more surveillance equipment, burner phones, and a notepad containing coordinates. One set of coordinates pointed to a residential neighborhood in West Maple. It was a place Alex had driven past hundreds of times. A quiet dead-end street called Hollow Street with 9 homes all built in the 1980s. The coordinates marked the 7th house on the right, a brown brick ranch with drawn blinds and a crooked mailbox. The house had been sold several times in the past decade. No names ever matched Wexley, but the detective suspected he had used a false identity to rent it temporarily. The house had been vacant for months. The city was preparing to foreclose. By morning, a search warrant was approved. Alex waited by his car as police approached the property. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was still. Dust floated through weak sunlight leaking from cracks in the blinds. The house was mostly empty, but not abandoned. The living room had a worn recliner, a small TV, and a mini fridge with expired cans of soda. A single sleeping bag was spread across the floor of the back bedroom. The closet contained a duffel bag with toiletries, a set of men's clothes, and a roll of cash secured with a rubber band. The bathroom mirror had residue from duct tape as if something had been attached and later removed. No photos, no fingerprints on file. But something about the space felt recent. Someone had been there, maybe days ago, maybe less. The officers moved room to room, clearing each slowly. In the hallway, a vent cover was askew. One officer knelt down and shined a light inside. Tucked into the corner of the vent was a flash drive wrapped in foil. The detective carefully retrieved it and slipped it into an evidence bag. They would analyze it later. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, an envelope sat beneath a cracked ceramic bowl. Inside were more printed photos. Alex's stomach clenched. These photos were recent. One showed the outside of the motel where he was staying. Another showed him at the diner near the police station. A third was of the detective taken from across the street as she exited her car. The photos had dates and times written on the back in small, precise letters. Wexley had not just been active. He had been watching them closely. The flash drive contents were reviewed later that day at the station. It contained dozens of folders, each labeled with names, locations, and years. One folder was titled Lucas Extended. Inside were scanned pages of letters written by Lucas. Some were unfinished, others were only a few lines. They were addressed to his mother, to Alex, even to a girl named Marie who had sat next to him in science class. The files were organized meticulously as if someone had reread them often. Another folder contained audio recordings. Most were garbled background noise, but one had the sound of a child humming. A soft, broken melody. Alex could not bear to listen to the full recording. He asked them to stop the playback. The evidence mounted. Every item painted a clearer picture of obsession and control. Wexley had kept everything. He had created archives of his thoughts, recordings, and movements. The house on Hollow Street had not been random. It had placed him within walking distance of Lincoln Middle School. Another notebook found beneath the floorboards listed locker combinations and class schedules from over 20 years ago. He had memorized everything. The timeline of his movements formed a disturbing pattern. He never disappeared. He simply shifted from one shell of a life to another. That evening, a tip came from a gas station employee 2 towns over. A man matching Wexley's description had bought food and batteries 3 days ago. He paid in cash and wore a hooded sweatshirt with the tag still attached. Surveillance footage confirmed the match. The detective now had a window of movement. A search was launched in the surrounding area. Alex volunteered to help, but it was asked to remain at the station in case Wexley attempted contact. It was not an empty precaution. That night a letter arrived. No return address, no stamps, just a plain white envelope slipped under the police department's side door. It was addressed to Alex. The letter was handwritten in the same shaky block letters as the journal entries found in the shed. The message was short. It said, "You are close, but you are not ready. Some things are better hidden." He signed it with a single initial. W. Alex read it twice, then a third time. He handed it to the detective who bagged it for analysis. But the words repeated in his mind long after. Not ready. Not ready for what? The man who had taken his brother was not done. He was not running. He was playing a final game. That night, Alex stared at a map spread across his motel bed. He traced the points of contact, the field, the storage unit, the hidden chamber, the rented house. A circle formed between them. A shape not of escape but orbit. Wexley had stayed close for years, always circling, always returning. He had lived among them like a shadow. And now, as the trail grew warmer, Alex knew one thing for certain. The end was near. One more piece needed to fall into place. The morning after the letter arrived, Alex walked through the town alone. The streets were wet with dew, the sky pale and colorless. The town had begun to stir, but everything felt quieter, more strained. He passed the soccer field where it had all started. The grass was trimmed, the bleachers freshly painted, but the ghosts still lingered beneath the surface. He stood at the spot where Lucas had last been seen. The memory clung to the air like static. He imagined his brother there again, cleats swinging from his shoulder, eyes distant, unaware that someone had already chosen him. Alex clenched his jaw and turned away. He followed the sidewalk past the school, past the rusted fences, and toward the path that led behind the west wing. His footsteps were slow but deliberate. The pieces were all on the board now. Somewhere in this town, the man who had taken Lucas was watching. He had stayed hidden for years, but his presence was no longer a secret. He had started leaving trails not to escape, but to be found. The detective called just before noon. A park ranger had reported something strange at an old lookout point just outside the city. It was a place that had once been a picnic area before erosion closed the trail. The ranger had found a worn backpack hanging from a low tree branch. Inside were protein bars, a change of clothes, a journal, and a hunting knife. The name on the backpack's tag was not Wexley, but the detective believed it was another alias. The journal had an entry dated just 2 days prior. It said, "Soon they will come here. I will not run." The words were written in that same uneven handwriting, each letter etched with slow intensity. A page beneath it contained a single drawing. It was a boy standing next to a man, both facing a tunnel. No faces, just shapes surrounded by tall trees. The drawing was childlike, but the message beneath it was not. It read, "We go where the echoes stay." Alex drove to the lookout that afternoon. The path was steep and slick with leaves. The ranger had already taped off the area, but Alex was granted access. He walked slowly beneath the canopy, eyes scanning every shape, every hollow. The view at the top was vast, overlooking the town and the valley below. He tried to picture Wexley standing there watching from this very ridge. The thought made his skin crawl. The detective joined him a few minutes later. She had brought more searchers. They fanned out along the lower trails. Alex noticed something the ranger had missed. A cluster of stones arranged in a loose spiral hidden beneath a thicket of roots. At the center was a small metal box. Inside the box was a flash drive. The detective took it carefully, sealed it, and nodded to Alex. They would examine it back at the station. The flash drive contained a single video file. It opened to a static-filled screen, then cut to footage of a room. It was dark and narrow with concrete walls and no windows. The camera was angled toward a wooden chair. A man stepped into frame. His face was obscured by a baseball cap and shadows. He looked older now, thinner, more brittle. But his movements were calm, deliberate. He sat in the chair and looked directly into the camera. His voice was low and clear. He said, "I know you have found what you were meant to find. You want the rest, you want closure, you want someone to punish, but there is a part of this you will never understand. I took something because I had lost everything. I made a space where silence could live. You call it a crime. I called it home." He paused, then leaned forward. His eyes were glassy hollow. He said, "If you want the final piece, go to the place where you last saw the light in his eyes." Alex watched the video twice. The final line stuck in his throat. It was not just cryptic, it was personal. Only someone who had seen Lucas up close would know such a phrase. Alex sat in silence, replaying every memory. Then it hit him. There had been a moment, a detail buried beneath 21 years of pain. The last family photo before Lucas vanished, taken on the front porch of their home at dusk. Lucas had squinted at the flash, his eyes glinting in the twilight. That had been the last time Alex remembered seeing that sparkle. That light. The photo had hung on the hallway wall for years, a frozen fragment of a life unfinished. He drove to the house now occupied by another family. He knocked and asked permission to walk the perimeter. The new owner recognized him and agreed. Alex circled the yard, slowly pausing at the porch. The boards creaked beneath his boots. The bushes had overgrown, but the base of the porch remained the same. As he examined the foundation, something caught his attention. A narrow vent half covered by leaves. He knelt and brushed them away. The metal grate was newer than the others. He pulled it loose. Behind it was a hollow space, deep and dark. He reached inside and felt something cold and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a box. Inside were a cassette tape, an old toy whistle, and a folded note. The tape had a sticker labeled Echoes. The note read, "You stood here when he smiled." That was real. The rest was mine. The handwriting was the same. Alex closed the box and stood in silence. The sun was beginning to set behind the trees. For the first time, the final turn had arrived. The following morning brought a stillness to the town unlike any before. Clouds hung low, pressing against rooftops and telephone wires, muting the sunlight until everything looked like an old photograph. Alex sat in the station's evidence room, the small cassette tape in his hand. The label read Echoes in shaky, faded handwriting. A technician prepared an old player on the table. The detective stood by the doors, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When the tape clicked into place and began to roll, a faint hiss filled the room. Then a voice emerged. It was not Lucas. It was not Carl Wexley. It was a woman's voice. Calm. Detached. She recited numbers, dates, and phrases. At first it seemed like nonsense. Then Alex recognized a date. It was the week Lucas vanished. The numbers were coordinates. The phrases were brief observations. One boy smaller than others. Quiet at lunch. Strong left foot. The voice continued with entries that mirrored what Alex had seen in the journals. They were recordings of surveillance. Spoken logs. But the voice did not belong to a stranger. It belonged to the old neighbor, the woman with the yellow light behind her curtain. Alex and the detective drove to the house without alerting local units. The porch was empty. The curtains were drawn. They knocked twice. No answer. The detective motioned to the back. They circled through the yard. A small shed stood behind the house, its door slightly ajar. Inside, they found more of the same handwriting. Spiral notebooks, labeled folders, but all written by someone else. The voice from the tape had been hers. The woman had not just seen the man with red-laced shoes. She had helped him. Maybe not at first, maybe out of fear, but the pages showed complicity, a timeline, details only a watcher would know. The detective radioed for backup. Alex stood outside the shed, staring at the rusted swing in the yard. His breath felt heavy. The truth had become wider than he imagined. Carl Wexley had not acted alone. He had been enabled, shielded, protected. Later that day, police found the woman at a care facility. She had checked herself in 3 days earlier under another name. She said little, only that some people disappear and some people are disappeared. She spoke of silence as comfort, of control as peace. Her eyes never met Alex's. She asked no questions about the boy. She claimed she remembered only the quiet. When officers searched the crawlspace beneath her home, they found more tapes, each labeled, each documenting fragments of someone else's life. No bodies, no more evidence of Lucas beyond what had already been found. But her role was undeniable. She had watched. She had recorded. She had said nothing. In the days that followed, the investigation expanded. Carl Wexley's face appeared on news outlets across the state. Tips flooded in. None confirmed his location. But the psychological profile developed from the journals suggested he would not run forever. He believed in patterns, in repetition. He would return. Eventually. The detective gave Alex a copy of the last drawing found in the second storage unit. It showed 2 stick figures standing at the edge of a black void. One small, one tall. No faces. Just lines. Above them, the word "end" was written in uneven ink. Alex taped the drawing to the motel wall beside the last photo of Lucas. A small part of him hoped that if Wexley saw it, if he ever returned to finish what he started, it would tell him one thing. He had failed. Lucas had been found. His silence had been broken. A memorial was held at the soccer field that weekend. Families gathered, some who remembered, some who did not. Children ran along the grass as older voices told stories in hushed tones. A wooden bench was installed beside the field engraved with Lucas's name and the words, "We remember you still." Alex sat on the bench alone after everyone left. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the field. He listened to the quiet. Not the quiet of fear, but the kind that comes when things are finally still. He closed his eyes and thought of the day Lucas had drawn that picture. The lopsided goalpost, the big brother with a crooked smile. It had been a message all along. He had not drawn fear. He had drawn home. He had drawn light. Weeks later, Alex moved out of the motel and into a small apartment downtown. He kept a few belongings, just the drawing, the cleats, and the box from beneath the porch. He began volunteering with a program for missing children's cases. He spoke little of his brother to strangers, but when he did, he described a boy who never gave up hope, who wrote letters in the dark, who waited for someone to find him. He never said the word closure. He did not believe in it. Some stories did not close. They echoed. The detective transferred to a federal task force and kept in touch through short emails. Updates on leads, new findings. But Carl Wexley remained elusive. His name joined lists and files. His photo passed through airports and bus stations. But his shadow stayed just beyond reach. One night, Alex received a final package. No return address. Inside was a cassette. Blank. He played it once. Only silence filled the room. No voice, no music, just the steady soft sound of nothing. He left it playing while he sat on the floor and looked out the window. The night was calm. The world outside held no answers. But he did not need them, because in the silence he could still hear Lucas's voice. In every note. In every line of that journal. In the swing of those cleats. In the whisper of leaves behind the school. His brother had spoken, had left traces, had made sure that he would not be forgotten. And that was enough. If you found this story gripping, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more mystery narratives. Let us know in the comments what you think about the twists in this story and where in the world you are watching from. We read every comment and your thoughts help shape future episodes.